I'm Bob. I'm an alcoholic. Okay, I just want to go through some of these quickly so we can get to step 10, 11, and 12. First question, where do you see yourself in 30 years? Probably unable to read this. I hope I'm here in 30 years. If I follow my sponsor's footsteps, I should be, but we'll see. Some of these I can't read them. I'm sorry. This is an interesting question. Hi, Bob. What do you suggest are the key factors or principles in a spiritual marriage where both people are strong members? I'm absolutely convinced of this, that the set of spiritual principles that are the most useful in relationships are the 12 traditions. The 12 traditions will really solve the problem because there's only one problem in the individual, and it's the same problem that's in the relationship, that's in the family, that's in the group, that's in the business, and it's an overabundance of self-will. Somebody's trying to control and want their way. And if you put the 12 traditions in place as a set of spiritual principles to live by, you're pushing yourself aside for principles. And it starts with the common welfare. It's got to come first. In other words, it's no more me first. And the group conscience, God, I wish I had more time to spend. I'd like to talk a lot about the traditions, but we don't have enough time. The second tradition is where we get our power from. And it talks about this, what Carl Jung referred to as the collective. And it's that when two or more of us come together for the purpose of recovery, something's in the midst. This loving God that will always expresses itself through the group conscience. And everybody has that experience. You may not even be awake to it, but you've had the experience of sitting in the meeting and you're hearing something that you really need to hear from a stranger. Because when we come together for the purpose of recovery, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. There's more here in an Alcoholics Anonymous group that's based on recovery. There's more in that room than just the people. I've been in meetings, you can cut the spirit with a knife. You can feel it in the room. And you can, the adverse is also true. If you've ever gone to a very narcissistic meeting where nobody's helping anybody and it's all about themselves, what happens? You come out the backside of that meeting feeling like, I really need a meeting, Jesus. Because the one lights your spirit up because you feel the presence of God there. Because there's a whole bunch of, it's a room full of people that care about something other than themselves, something greater than themselves, something more important. It's a group full of people who push themselves aside. And on through the traditions. And in a family, that's true. In a business. I use the 12 traditions to run my company. And all my employees, except for one, were not in AA. They didn't know even where they came from, but they understood the principles. And I'll tell you something I thought was remarkable. Non-normal, reasonably well-adjusted non-alcoholics will get the traditions easily. Alcoholics, we're not so sure. I don't know. In the fourth step, people talk about deep, dark secrets. Where's the column for this? It's in the fear inventory. If you're threatened by something coming out into the light, it's fear. All your deep, dark secrets go on your fear inventory because you can't have them without a fear of disclosure. Right? Go on your fear inventory. Regarding the 12th step, what happens when you're putting yourself out and there's no one asking you to bring them the truth from the book or out of the book. Well, everybody in this room, if you'll do what I'm about to talk about, will end up sponsoring people. Some of you will not want to do it because it's inconvenient. You're afraid of what people think. The first thing you do is, first you gotta be willing. And then you gotta find a fishing pond. And a fishing pond is well stocked with new people, right? And you find a place, I like detoxes, recovery houses, short-term jails where the people are going to get out and you can actually work with them. Not the long-term, because then you can't work with them. Short-term. Homeless shelters. And if there's a meeting existing in one of these places, then you put yourself in the mix. You show up for that meeting. And here's what you do. You show up early. You find yourself a little meeting. And maybe you find a detox and there's no AA meeting in there. And you go to the guy who runs the place and you ask, can I take you out to lunch? And then just tell him at lunch, just say, listen, I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I don't want to interfere with what you're doing here, but it's important for me to help people like myself. And if you would be willing, I would come in here and I would be one of your go-to guys, and I'd put a meeting on here whenever you say. And I'd be delighted to do it. So once you find this little niche, this meeting in a place, you show up like a half hour early. And you help set the room up for the meeting. And you wait for the new guys to start coming in. And you know how they come in. Some they're hanging their heads, or they're coming in arrogant, or they come in, all the trappings of a newly sober person. And you start chatting them up. Start telling them a little bit about you. And then somehow encourage them to talk to you about themselves and find out a little bit about them. Doesn't take long, a couple minutes. Get around to the subject of sponsorship. Ask them, do you have a sponsor? After you've told them how important it has been for your recovery to have a sponsor. How you don't think you could make it, or you don't know how anyone could make it without help from someone. Ask them if they have a sponsor. And if they say no, tell them, say, listen, I don't want to impose myself on you, but it is very important to my recovery to help people. And if you would like to have a sponsor, it would be my honor to work with you as people had worked with me. And here's my number. And if you do that, I'll tell you, you'll see something. You won't see it every time, but every once in a while, you'll say that to someone and you'll see their whole face change. Because they have been battling with their own fears of asking someone for some time, because they're too afraid to ask somebody, and you just solved their problem for them. And I'll tell you, if you did that twice, find 2 meetings a week like that, and you did that to 2 people at each one of those 2 meetings, I can promise you within a year, that God will have shown you how to create the fellowship you crave. And don't let your ego tell you smugly that I'm just going to wait for them to ask me. Dr. Bob never asked Bill Wilson for help. Nobody that Bill Wilson 12-stepped ever asked Bill Wilson for help. Bill Wilson sought them out not because they were alcoholic, but because Bill was an alcoholic. This is not about you saving their life, and that may happen. It may happen. But it's really about you saving your life. The helper gets the help. Always keep that in mind. This is what frees you of the bondage of self. It's very, very, I can't even stress that enough. I would not be here today if it wouldn't have been for 12-step work. Oh, I hate this question. Jesus. Hi, Bob. What is your opinion of the thing that's the biggest threat to AA? I'll be honest with you. I get scared sometimes. You know what I think the biggest threat to AA is? Obsessive self-seeking by our members. There, I think, I could be wrong, but it appears to me, and I travel around a lot, it appears to me that there's more self-seeking, self-profiting, self-grandizing, self-gratification occurring in Alcoholics Anonymous, initiated by our membership, than has ever existed in our history. We have predatory treatment centers, maybe not here. In the U.S., we have places that are $100,000 a month, and they prey on the broken and distraught rich families of newcomers. And they'll milk them for hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's people in AA now that should know better, that at one time they were good AA members. Now they're recovery coaches, and they're making millions of dollars getting paid to sponsor the rich and the movie stars. There's people in AA, there's over a dozen workbooks that members of AA wrote explaining the steps, as if our big book's not quite enough for us. There is a certain arrogance in taking a program that has saved over 4 million lives, not counting the other 12-step programs that are offshoots of it, and saying to yourself, yeah, but I think I can do better. And here's the problem with the workbooks. Some of them are, I'm willing to believe they're all well-intentioned. But they're one of the most divisive, disunifying forces in Alcoholics Anonymous, because in most cities, in the U.S. anyway, there's groups that form up studying the program through different workbooks. Whether it's Stepping Ahead, Big Book Awakenings, Primary Purpose, Back to Basics. There's over a dozen of them. And they all those groups have this attitude that's divisive. The attitude is, we have the real way to do it, and everybody else is stupid. And it's very egocentric. And the people who write them grandize themselves. I'm the guy with the workbook. Let me come and do a workshop on my workbook, and maybe we could sell a few copies. Right, the guy's got websites. And there's people writing books on spirituality, and they create websites selling talks of themselves and their books. I've been to conventions that just make me crazy, where one of the speakers at the convention wrote a book and is browbeat the committee into letting him do a book signing to sell his books at the conference. What the hell's that about? We got bounty hunters in the U.S. now. You know what bounty hunters are? There's so much with this new opioid epidemic. The government is, and the insurance companies now are mandated to pay for all this treatment. There's so much money available that these treatment centers, high-dollar treatment centers, will come out to members of AA. And maybe like some of you in the room that do 12-step work, that are sober a while. And they'll come to you and they'll say, listen, I know you run into a lot of new people. From now on, when you get a new guy, instead of taking him to your home group and helping him with the steps, you can do that later, but we'll give you $2,500 per person for everyone you bring to us. Don't bring them to AA, bring them to us. Because they get $8,000 to $15,000 a month for each person, right? And the sad part is that this stuff goes on. And this is the giving place. This is not the taking place. You know, you can take in a lot of places in the world, but don't take in AA. Don't be a predator here. Whether it's a sexual predator, a financial predator, or a prestige predator. I get some guys I used to be friends with. I give them a wide berth now, because they put talks of themselves online. And they send CDs of themselves to AA conventions around the world. I mean, if selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of our trouble, isn't that like arming terrorists or something. You know, I mean, it's like crazy. I mean, that's such bad form. There's more of that goes, and I think that just the thing that will destroy me, and the book promises that I must be free of this or it kills me, is selfishness and self-centeredness. And I think if anything ever killed AA, it would be selfishness and self-centeredness. That we would even be selfish here. In the place that we are tasked to be a giver, we become a taker. That, I see, whenever I see that, very, very few things get my hackles up anymore. Very few things aggravate me, but when I see someone, I love AA, how could you not, for God's sakes? When I see someone abusing it, someone using it, it really bothers me. After all the good and the sad part about the people that are using AA is that Alcoholics Anonymous was given to them for free. It saved their life. It saved their families. And their selfishness knows no bounds. That they're going to take a free gift and try to profit from it. It's like spiritual prostitution. Right? That's the thing that scares me the most I see today. The sex ideal. Explain the construction of this between yourself and God. Oh, that's a work in progress. I'll tell you, it's like, it begins with realizing, when I look to see my own levels of selfishness and dishonesty, inconsideration, self-seeking, all the fear, all these things in relationships, what starts to come, and I ask God to mold my ideals. I think often what our ideals come out to be is the opposite of what we were. I think maybe our ideals are really who we are anyway. I heard, my friend Sandy told a story. It really touched me because I thought, that's really it, isn't it? He said he was new and he was confused and he hadn't really worked the steps yet. And he wasn't doing very well. And he was at a meeting. He got there early. And he sat there and he watched some new guy come into the meeting, and the guy looked bad. He looked like he just came off a bad drunk. And he watched the guy, and the guy went up to the coffee, and his hands were shaking, and he had a hard time pouring a cup of coffee. He poured about a half a cup. That was the best he could do without spilling it, and he went over and he sat down, and he just was looking down at his hands, and he couldn't look up much. And Sandy sat there, and he was looking at the guy. And there was a part of him that wanted to go over and talk to him. But he was afraid. He was afraid maybe the guy will think what's the guy going to think? And the meeting was over, and the guy got out of there before Sandy had a chance to talk to him, and he went home that night, and he thought, man, I should have talked to that guy. Everything in him told him to go reach out to that guy, make that guy feel welcome. And he didn't because he was afraid. He said the whole week went by, and he kept thinking about that guy. Gets to the meeting, the same meeting, he gets there a little extra early, hoping the guy's going to show up so he can talk to the guy. And the guy doesn't show up. And he's sitting there and he's mentally kicking himself. I should have talked to that guy. My God. Oh, I hope he's all right. 5 minutes after the meeting started, the guy walks in. He walks smoothly up to the coffee, pours himself a whole cup to the top, takes a sip, walks over and sits down in his seat, and he's over the shakes, and Sandy said, something inside me just went, yes, yes! And he said, that was the real Sandy. It had always been the real Sandy. And the moments I feel love without self-attachment, maybe that's the ideal. I know that I had extreme evidence of selfishness in relationships, being a me first person. So maybe one of the ideals is that I try to not be me first, be you first. To think about the other person before I think about me. Now that's an alien landscape for us. But to attempt to go down that road, to be honest, when in the past I've been dishonest because I'm afraid of rejection, I'm afraid of what you'll think, to risk that. One of the things that happens with so many of us is we're so afraid that if we were really, truly honest with someone, that they're not going to like us. So what often happens is we create a facade. And it's not completely dishonest, but it's not really you either. It's like the best of you on a good day on steroids. You know what I mean? It's like super you. It's like the best of you. It's you at your kindest. But it's not really you, because you, like me and like all of us, we have some days when we have quite a bit of that, and then there's some other days where I'm not doing so well. And I won't let you see that part of me because I'm afraid you're going to throw me away. Here's the problem with that. If you love me for the facade, I will immediately lose respect for you because I fooled you. And if you love me for being the guy I'm not, it reinforces my need to be somebody I'm not. And sometimes if you're willing to trust God, and trust God with your relationships, which means, it might mean you're going to be alone. It might be. You might get to find out something, that there actually are people. You'll question their sanity, but there's actually people that will love you as is. Truly. And sometimes you get to find the sweetest thing you'll ever find, that you don't have to be anything you're not. That there are people who will love you exactly as you are. I would rather be loved. I would rather be hated for who I am than loved for who I'm not. It talks in our book about living the double life. And we're masters at creating facades, stage characters. The problem is I lose myself in the abyss between who I really am, and I know who I am, and who I want you to think I am. My grand sponsor, Chuck, used to say, you cannot compartmentalize your life. You have to be the same person at work as you are in AA, as you are with your sponsees, as you are with your kids, as you are with your mate, as you are with your friends. You have to be the same person. And I've told guys I sponsor, these crazy, they think it's funny, but it's true. Listen, if you're an asshole, be an asshole with everybody. Be who you are. Be who you are. Because you can grow from who you are. You can't grow from who you're not. You can't progress from who you're not. But you can progress from who you are. So that's the ideals come from everything, all the mistakes we've made, I think. What kind of prayers do you do? Has your belief changed over time? Yes, a lot. And it keeps changing. And I think it should keep changing. What happened? I've done so many different things over the years, and my relationship with God is very easy today. It's really kind of nice. It was more rigid in earlier sobriety. I mean, when I was in earlier sobriety, I got up in the morning. I had these little books I would read, which 10 seconds later, I couldn't have told you what I read. But I'd read them every morning, and I'd get down, and I'd be on my knees, and I'd say the 3rd-step prayer, I'd say the 7th-step prayer, I'd say the 11th-step prayer. I'd ask God to help me maintain the desire not to drink throughout this day, and give me the power to carry it out, and help thy will be done, and show me who I can help, and then I'd be out the door, right? Well, I said a lot of those prayers for a lot of years. Here's the way I am. If I say these set prayers over and over and over again, after a while they become robotic. You know? They become shallow. They don't mean anything. I can say them without even thinking about them. It just becomes like automatic. It's nothing. And a few years ago, quite a few years ago actually, I really had a desire to have a more conscious contact with God. I had a desire to make my relationship with God more intimate. And I started thinking about, what am I doing with God? You know, I throw a little rehearsed paragraph at him and then leave the room. I mean, it's kind of, and how intimate is that? I said, if you want, and I thought, to have an intimate relationship, you got to have some conversations with people. So I started having conversations with God. Like you would, maybe like you'd talk to yourself. Only I try to get a sense of God's presence in the conversation. I talk to God like I would talk to my sponsor when I'm being really honest. I tell him the things I'm afraid of. And I tell him, I said, look, it's not that I don't trust you, I'm just scared. I know your track record I'm going to be okay. I know from the past, but I'm a little scared here. I need some help. I asked him for his will. I said, if you got anybody you want me to help today, you're going to have to let me know it, because I get self-involved and I don't see opportunities to help people a lot. You're going to have to show me sometimes, because I miss stuff because I'm wrapped up in my head. I asked for freedom from self-will. I take 2 hours. I try to take 2 hours every morning before I rush into the day. And that's not all prayer and meditation by any means. Some of it is. Some of it's, I start, as I'm thinking about the 24 hours ahead, I say those prayers, and I've had my quiet time, my 20, 30, 40 minutes, whatever it may be on any particular day of quiet. I'll start checking texts from sponsees and emails and phone calls, because I have to formulate, as I think about the 24 hours a day, I got to think about what calls I have to return, because returning phone calls is very important in Alcoholics Anonymous. You don't want to hang people out in a limb like you don't care. You return their phone calls. That's what unselfish people do. And the texts I return, I try to answer. I try to answer all contacts I reply. Sometimes it's tedious, I'll tell you. Sometimes I get off a plane, I get off a 5-6 hour flight, and I just turn my phone on and I go, oh my God, oh Jesus. I'm going to be 3 days returning on, and it's not 3 days. I have a catastrophizing mind, just drama. It's about 45 minutes to an hour if I just take the first call and then the second call. I just go through it, it's not a big deal. I have various little meditations I do. Some of them involve breathing. Some of them involve sort of mantras that really have helped me over the years, like breathing in the cool, clean, freeing grace of God, and breathing out the warm, hot angst of self, and concentrating on my breathing, and breathing in God, breathing out Bob. Helps me. Doesn't always work as well as I'd like. How do you discern when you are in self-will or following God's will? I can tell myself this is God's will. Oh, I am capable. It talks about this in step 11. It says still being inexperienced. And I tell you, I think I'm inexperienced when it comes to God. It says being still inexperienced and having just made conscious contact with is always true for me. And the reason it's always true is conscious contact, unlike faith. Conscious contact is not, you can have faith 24/7. You can't have conscious contact 24/7. because it comes and goes like the tides. There are times when I really have a feeling of the presence of God, a sense of God in my life. There are other times I just have faith. I just go through the motions. So wherever you catch me in my life, if I have conscious contact, you can bet I recently just made it. And I probably won't have it for long. Because it evaporates. It comes and goes. Sometimes it evaporates because of the chatter and the surgence of self-will. Sometimes it just evaporates because that's what it does. It comes and goes. Like the seasons of the soul. And so it says, being in experience and having just made conscious contact with God, it will be, we cannot presume to be inspired at all times. And then it says, if you presume you're inspired, you may pay for that presumption in all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. And I've had my share of those. I remember my first relationship in sobriety. My first sponsor never was the arbiter of my sex conduct. Truly, he never was. But except for this one time, I was really obsessed with this girl. And he's the only time he ever said anything like this to me. He said, "You need to stay away from her. She's really sick." And I said to him, "Well, Dick, we're all kind of sick here, aren't we?" And he looked at me like, oh, God. I said, "She's God's will for me." He's looking at me like, I get this funny smirk on his face, like he suspects there's some entertainment value coming. And I said, "No, listen. Remember, I drank Richard's Wild Irish Rose. She drank Richard's Wild Irish Rose. It's God's will." And it sounds ludicrous today. I believed that at the time. What am I doing? Am I trying to surrender my will to God's? No, I'm trying to imagine that God's come to his senses and he's seeing things my way. I'm fantasizing and superimposing what I want, and as if it's God's will. There was a guy. He lives in Frankfurt now, and he's a good guy. He's sober a long time, and my roommate sponsored him. And when he was about 3 months sober, we were out to coffee. His sponsor, my roommate, myself, and him. And I think there was maybe one or two other guys there. And he told us, we were talking about God's will, and he said the funniest thing we'd ever heard. We almost fell out of our chairs. He said, "I really know now that God loves me." We said, "Really? How do you know that?" And he said, "Well, God knew that I didn't have much self-esteem. So he put 3 newcomer girls in my life to sleep with so I'd feel better about myself." We're falling out of our chairs. We're thinking, come on. And my sponsee, Brian, and I were on our way to Russia, and we flew through with an overnight in Frankfurt. I went to a meeting, and I ran into him. And my sponsee had heard me talk about this situation. Didn't know the guy's name or anything, but heard me talk about the situation. I said, "This is the guy I was telling you about." And he starts talking to my friend. He said, "That really happened to me, guys." And he said, it was so funny, he said, "Yeah. And I ended up marrying one of them, and it didn't work out well." That's why I have a sponsor. I tell the guys I sponsor, "Listen, if you're inspired and you think you know what God's will is, call me up, would you? And if you're really inspired, you better just come over and see me." The greatest example of a guy who got sober and he had a spiritual awakening, but he had no sponsor and no one to check his vision of God's will against, was Jim Jones. Jim Jones, it happened in about late 70s, 78, I think it came to fruition. The climax of this Jonestown story. Jim Jones had been a terrible alcoholic drug addict, probably more drugs, but he had a spiritual awakening. That's not uncommon. William James talks about those experiences. What William James also says is that the shine of them always wears off and the old personality reasserts itself. And he had one of those experiences. And out of that experience, he got a calling. He went to divinity school. He became a minister. He had a church in Oakland, California. To this day, there's still people in Oakland that will tell you about the good he did there in the community. He really did a lot of good. But he had no one to check his vision of God's will against, and he got more and more self-centered and more paranoid and full of self-centered fear and more controlling and more the actor who wants to run the whole show, and he didn't even know he was doing that. And he eventually got so paranoid and he felt like people were after him, and he moved his whole congregation to Jonestown in this compound, and he got weirder and weirder and weirder, and eventually he had several thousand followers there, and he made them all drink poison Kool-Aid, and they all died, and the ones that wouldn't drink it, he had his other followers, his soldiers, shoot him and kill him. One of the few survivors of Jonestown is a friend of mine who lives on the island of Maui. He was sober 30 years. He was a little kid. His parents threw themselves over him to protect him, so he survived. One of the few survivors of Jonestown. The tragic thing about that is that it's very possible that Jim Jones killed himself and had all those people kill themselves with a delusional belief he was doing God's will. Because the ego does not check itself as it goes slowly down the road to insanity. You can't check yourself because you can't see what's wrong, because what you'd be looking for, you're looking with. That's why a guy like me always needs a sponsor. And you know, if Jones would have had a sponsor, at the very least his sponsor would have said, Jim, the Kool-Aid's a bad idea. But he had no one except his own mind, and he had the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I have an amends to make on the other side of the world, but my husband does not agree. It's a tough one because, you know, we're supposed to consider the other people that may be affected. And if your husband, especially if it's a financial amends and your husband's afraid that this is going to cost him money, or maybe he's afraid, maybe it's an ex and he's afraid he doesn't want you to see him and he's afraid of that. I think maybe you have to honor that for right now and hope for a change of heart. And if God really wanted you to make that amends, that the wherever that doesn't seem to be in place yet would come about. It talks in the book about being considerate of others, and I think that's important. I was 6 months clean, went through the steps, have a sponsor, go to 4 meetings a week. That's probably not enough. But 1 week ago, for one night, I guess I went out. It looks like I broke. I don't know. But evidently the guy went out for one night a week ago. What advice do you have for me? Well, the first thing that would occur to me would probably be what your mother would say. Don't do that anymore. Well, you know, I think alcoholics drink for 3 reasons. And it's really one reason. And it's really untreated alcoholism. Untreated alcoholism drives us crazy. We have those mental blank spots where all of a sudden taking a drink seems like a good idea when it didn't 24 hours earlier. And some people come into Alcoholics Anonymous and they never buy the whole package. They do just enough for relief and then they drink again because they never really bought the whole package. Other people come to Alcoholics Anonymous and they'll do everything here and then they stop doing it because they do just enough to get relief and feel better and start to get some of the rewards of sobriety, and they feel like they've arrived somewhere, and they stop doing it, and they drink again. And some people never ever treat their disease because they're under the illusion that they're tough enough, strong enough, determined enough, committed enough to never drink again. And they have no idea how powerless they are over alcohol once they're in a state of abstinence. So there's only one answer, and that's to obsessively throw yourself into AA. And maybe you can't do that, and you can't put all your chips in the pot because you really secretly don't think you're an alcoholic. Not really. Not really. I mean, and I get that. I remember getting to a point where I could admit that I was an alcoholic. My God, the evidence was so overwhelming. I was relapsing in treatment center after treatment center, and failure after failure. Or I was getting intellectually bludgeoned into an acceptance that I was alcoholic. But even then, inside of me, I'm admitting I'm an alcoholic, but I'm a special kind of alcoholic. My case was different. And I could point to things in my life that had happened to me or that I had done that I didn't hear people in AA talk about. My case was different. Because my ego has to have me alone in order to have its way with me. I don't know. Keep throwing yourself into the program. How do you handle a situation when a group member is systematically 13-stepping newcomers? We pummel them with bags full of big books. Well, there's members of AA that maybe start, get. I have friends. I have a couple there. God, they've been married 30 years. She's got 30 years sober. Just celebrated 30 years at my home group. He's got 34 years sober. When he was 4 years sober and she was a week sober, he moved her in, which is crazy. And they're married and have had a great relationship. They've been married they've been together for 30 years. That's not what this person is talking about. I know what you're talking about. And we got a guy in my home group right now we're going to have a conversation with him, one of us, I know it. Because he's systematically preying on the newer girls, one right after another. This is not a mistake where you fall in love with someone you probably shouldn't have fallen. No, this is not that. This is prey. And it's habitual. And the common welfare has to come first. I mean, I don't care. I'm not the arbiter of your sex conduct. I don't care what you do. Just don't do it here. I sponsored a guy who was one of the world's greatest dog trainers. He had trained attack dogs for the police force. He had trained drug dogs for drug enforcement. I've never seen anybody that was more skilled at training a dog than this guy. And I went to him one day and I said, I want to ask you something. You're the best dog trainer I've ever seen. Could you train one of your dogs to crap in its own food bowl? He looked at me like, why'd you want to do that? He said, no, I don't think so. Isn't that something? Because an alcoholic will crap where he eats every single time. And I don't care what you do, just don't do it here. And I think we have to protect ourselves from predators. And not in a mean way, and not to throw anybody out of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I think a conversation with someone like, listen, we're glad you're here. Truly glad you're here. But you've got to give the newer girls a chance. I don't care what you do outside of AA. Doesn't matter. But in here, and my home group, we got some pretty strong women. They kind of circle the wagons around some of the new girls. I'm very proud of them. And I think we got to stand up and just listen. Not here, not here. We're not judging you. But I had a conversation with one guy. He'd gone through about 5 new girls. This is several years ago, my old home group. I had a conversation with him. I said, listen, I didn't have that much finesse at the time. And I said, you're not going to do that here. And he said, well, you can't tell me what to do. You're not the arbiter of my sex conduct. I said, you're right, I'm not. But I'll tell you something. You do that again here, and you're going to know a level of public humiliation beyond anything you've ever experienced. And I will stand right up, and you will be so embarrassed you'll want to kill yourself. And I'll do that in front of everybody. And he said a couple choice words, and he didn't come to that group anymore. Well, that's fine. He was welcome to come there. But no predators here. We don't want him here. How do you get a sponsee to work if you can't get one? To work with if you can't get one. I already covered that. Just keep pitching. You know, there's a spiritual principle. If you throw enough crap up against the wall, some of it sticks. You don't have to be profound. You just have to fling crap. That's all. Just keep flinging crap. Already did that one. What can you do if you're trying to help a newcomer, but they only go to meetings if you collect them and drop them or take them there and then take them home? Listen. Never put more time and energy into someone's recovery than they're willing to put into themselves. You know what? I get new guys all the time. They say, I want you to meet me at this meeting. They just got out treatment. I want you to meet me at this meeting. Well, I live really on the other side of town. I said, I'll tell you what. If you get there, I'll give you a ride home. How about that? You do your part, I'll do my part. Well, it's really far. I don't know if I can make it. I said, listen, if they were giving out free, unlimited supplies of drugs and alcohol, would you get there? Well, yeah, I guess you would. Put as much energy and effort into AAs you used to put into trying to get high. A question on anonymity. You have mentioned people's surnames. Is that surname last name? Have I mentioned people's last names?
Only dead people.
Huh?
Only dead people so far.
Only dead people. Well, if they're offended by that, I will let them say so. I really try not to mention anyone's name in a way. I wouldn't even mention their first names in cities or states where they live. I wouldn't do that. How does, including your own? Well, okay. This is a big concern of mine. You know, when I first got sober, I went to an AA clubhouse, and there wasn't much on the traditions there. There wasn't very many old-timers there. It was all new people struggling to stay sober. People within their first 5 years. And occasionally, old-timers would pop in there, and all we ever did was give our first name. Like, we thought that's what you're supposed to do. That's what anonymity is, isn't it? You don't let anybody know who you are. And so that's what we do. We'd only give our first name. And then sometimes these old-timers, guys sober 10, 15 years, would come to the meeting. And I remember my sponsor came there and gave his last name. I was waiting for the tradition police to storm the building. I mean, oh my God, he gave his last name. And I got into general service, and I started going to these seminars and these workshops on anonymity. And a book had come out called Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, and there was a quote from Dr. Bob in there where he said, this is brilliant, he said that the level of anonymity is set exactly at the public level. And he said, he thought it was just as much a breach of the tradition to change it to the fellowship level as it was to the public level. That I'm not to hide you have the right, if you want to be visible here and not let anybody know you, and because you're afraid, you can do that. But as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous who's no longer afraid of what people think or afraid of people knowing I'm an alcoholic, I give my last name in the fellowship. And I do that because I want to be available. If I share something about going through a divorce or having a difficult amends to make, and someone hears that in a meeting and they go home and they think to themselves, man, I got that same deal. I got to talk to that guy. My number is in directory. If you contact directory assistance with the phone company for Las Vegas, they have my number. You can call me if you know my last name. So I was taught in general service by delegates and trustees of Alcoholics Anonymous in these workshops that I give my last name in AA, but never break my anonymity at the public level. And that's very important. I was sober about 10 or 12 years, and someone from television approached me. Somebody in AA had dimed me out about being a Skid Row wino who now operated the largest wine operation in the state of Nevada. Sold more wine, retail wine, than any other store. And they thought it was an amazing story. And they wanted to come and do a story on this wino to wine dealer kind of thing, this rags to riches thing. And I said, no. What do you mean no? I said, I can't do that. I will not do that. Well, my God, you'll be getting a fortune in free advertising. And I thought, yeah, you're right. I probably would. I'd probably make an extra $1 million just on the free advertising, being all over the TV on a special like that. I won't do it. I cannot survive setting myself apart as a grandized member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Right? Can't do it. And yet I give my name in meetings. Now there's something happening that's been happening the last few years, and it bothers me. I've been talking to my sponsor about it. I don't know. He doesn't know what to do because he gives his last name in meetings but never at public level. And I give my last name in meetings but never at public level. And here's what's happening. Well-intentioned members of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I don't think there's any malice in it, I think it's just they don't understand the traditions, are taking recordings of people that speak in AA, and they're putting them without asking anyone's permission. They're putting them on the internet, on things like YouTube, iTunes, XASP, and they don't stop and bleep out the last names, which I wish they would do that. They don't do it. And so they're taking us at fellowship level and putting us into public level without our permission. And there's an old Ron White joke, who's a funny comedian in the U.S., and he tells this story, and he's a terrible drunk. He tells this story about being really drunk in this bar, and he was obnoxious in the bar. And the bouncer in the bar threw him outside the bar, where he was immediately arrested outside the bar, and he was arrested for being drunk in public. And he said to the cops, I wasn't drunk in public. I was drunk in a bar. They threw me into public. Arrest them, right? And that's what I feel like in AA. I gave my last name in the fellowship, and the people threw me into public. I don't know what to do about it. So my sponsor and I have been talking about, we came up with something that it's hard to do. Don't give your last name in a meeting anymore. It's a bad habit of doing that. I've done that. I've probably done that 400 times a year for 38 years. And for me to undo that, to start, my name's Bob, right? I mean, it's like knee jerk. It's like I can't. It's part of me. But we were both talking about trying to train ourselves not to do it. And yet, I'll come home from a weekend somewhere. I'll open my emails often, or texts, and I get or Facebook, and I get messages from people. I had people here this weekend that said how much they were helped by something they listened to me online. That I didn't put it online, but it helped them. what do I do with that? I mean, it's really a dilemma for me.